Good afternoon, everybody. So today's webinar is two pretty cool things. The most important thing that you should know is that you have hit through and worked through the worst of the homework weeks. From this point on, it gets a lot easier. The description of business and the marketing strategy sections are usually the two toughest. So this week's homework is going to be pages 48 to 52 in your workbook. And if you could get that to me by September 9th, that would be fabulous. So for the location, we're going to be looking at you describing the location for your businesses. Now, some of you are taking an existing workshop and just converting that into a for-profit operation. So in those cases, you're going to be describing the actual location as it is today. Others of you are creating new businesses that are going to either require space in your existing locations and or a separate location for those operations. And in that case, you're going to have to describe the location as it will be instead of how it is right now. So the first thing that you need to identify, and this is kind of a checkoff, is the type of space that you're going to be utilizing for the business. We're going to get into this in a little bit more detail at the end of the session, but you also need to identify how you're going to structure that space for the for-profit within the non-for-profit. So there should be a lease in place that you'll put together for the utilization of that space. Once you've identified the type of location that you have, we're going to be looking at what are the physical features of the location that you're going to be utilizing. So what is the square footage? Brief description of how it's laid out. Is there any road visibility, and does that matter? What kind of signage that you have and or are able to have. Make sure that any sign plans that you have are within compliance of the sign ordinance for where your location is going to be. We're going to need to know the terms of the lease that you plan on establishing with the not-for-profit. What is your monthly rent? Will you be charged property taxes by square foot, or will that be built into the rent? Are there any snow removal or landscaping fees, any common area expenses that you'll be splitting? What are the projected utilities for that space? How long of a lease will you be entering into with your organization? What type of parking? And if there's going to be a deposit requirement. I also need to have, this is probably a little bit more for me to lay the groundwork in words, but if you could draw a floor plan of the space. Kindergarten level drawing is perfectly okay. I just need to get an idea of how it's laid out so that I can describe it in words within your business plan. Once you've done the floor plan, we need to identify what are some of the expenses of the location, if there are any, to get this up and running. So if you need to do renovations to the space, we need a description of what type of renovations you plan on doing and what that estimated expense is going to be. We also need to know if there's any furniture, fixtures, or equipment that needs to be purchased to go into the space in order for it to operate as the business as you envision it. So even though you are an existing workshop, if you need to restructure your office environment for the separation of the two entities, what are you going to need to purchase in order for that to happen? So for a list of items that you're going to purchase, approximately how many of each you're going to need, a cost per item, to give us the estimated expense. Also would like to know what other businesses are going to be in that neighborhood. It helps to identify how your business is going to fit within the overall community. And most importantly, what impact is the location going to have on how this business operates? If you are doing a business that is going to require foot traffic, is your location in an area with a lot of foot traffic, or is it in an area that's a little bit more off the beaten path? If you are in a business that's more of a destination, or something that your customers will never actually visit, how does your location impact that component of the operation? We ask that you make sure you know what the sign ordinance is for your community, so that the type of sign that you plan on installing, what are the dimensions, the construction costs, and the installation costs. So all things considered, the homework this week is much easier than last week's. Are there any questions on what we need for the location of your businesses?
I'm going to unmute your phones in case you have any questions.
We need that much space?
Well, the Career Vision's landlord is a slumlord in Saranac. That's one problem. My thoughts were if we could combine that, some office space for them with a retail store and furniture and flowers and maybe looking for plants.
Is that a question you're asking?
Co-op store or something.
Okay, Kate, I don't think there are any questions.
And working with your boards for. So what we will be doing at the end is kind of opening up that conversation, and hopefully everyone will participate in that actual conversation so that we make sure that you're on the right track for moving forward and implementing these business plans once they're ready. So we're going to start off with time management and prioritizing. And time management is probably one of the most challenging skills to acquire if you don't have it. And if you do have it, it can also be very challenging to not let it overtake your world. And for those of us that are more on that anal retentive spectrum, you can actually spend so much time managing your time that you're just as ineffective as though you had nothing. So there's a fine line and a happy medium with all of this. And I thought that a good place to start would be talking about really identifying what some of the obvious problems in time management are. So in doing some research on the topic, I found that when it comes to time management, there are a couple of key feelings, thoughts, challenges that people are finding in the workplace that are very common. The number one challenge to moving forward and accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish has been a general feeling of being overwhelmed. There's also being forced into a situation where you tend to be more reactive than proactive. A challenge actually finishing projects, the fine art of procrastination, and managing the distractions that are in the workplace. So that said, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of look at how to overcome some of these challenges. And when it comes to feeling overwhelmed in the workplace, right now as employees in the United States, our employers are expecting more from us than they ever have before, and they haven't necessarily always given us the resources, the support systems, the financial incentives necessarily to make this easy. And as a result, we're seeing that the American workforce is consistently generating a feeling of being very overwhelmed with everything that's on their plate right now. There are some strategies that you can use to kind of mitigate that as much as possible. And the first one would be really prioritizing your responsibilities. And although this takes some time, it's an important thing to do if you're looking to get rid of that overwhelming feeling. So you start by just making a list of everything that you're responsible for. Big, small, recurring, one-time, anything that's on your plate. If you're going to do this, kind of start on the high level if it's a project-based, and then you'll list out the tasks underneath it. Once you've got that entire list of things that you are supposed to be working on, then you can start to prioritize the things that are really important and urgent, things that are important but not so urgent, things that are not important but urgent, and things that are not important or not urgent. From that prioritization, you can develop a short list that you use to identify the things that need to be done right away, and an ability to schedule those things that need to be done in the future in the order in which they need to be done. The beautiful thing of scheduling a short list is that it enables you to schedule those recurring tasks, whether it's something that you do daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual. You can break your projects out, and when you're scheduling your tasks, make sure you block the time off of your calendar to complete those tasks. If it's something that you've identified as a priority, if you schedule it as an appointment on your calendar, you're much more likely to get it done and get rid of that overwhelmed feeling because you will have blocked off the time to do so. For those of you that are in the reactive phase and not being able to be as proactive as you would like, remember that it's hard to make progress on anything when all you're doing is reacting. And if you can take a little time out of each day to work on those projects that are important to you or that are looming and are going to become something that you have to be reactive towards but should be proactive, it will get you into the habit of kind of solving some problems ahead of time before they turn into those crisis moments. And remember, when you're in a reactive mode, all of your activities tend to be influenced by other people and circumstances. And it doesn't require any personal responsibility, choice, or initiative as to what you're working on. When you can transition from the reactive to the proactive, you start to rely a lot more on that initiative, personal responsibility, and personal engagement in what you're working on. It involves influence of you and others, as well as demonstrates leadership within your organization. So transitioning from reactive to proactive is something that always takes time, but the more you start to transition, the less you'll have to be reactive because you will have been proactive. If you're like me, where finishing projects can become a challenge, you have to just recognize that with all of the demands on our day, it's always going to be difficult to accomplish a project and finish what you've started. If this is something that you also struggle with, I find that it always helps to break that project down into manageable tasks and mini projects that can be completed in smaller chunks of time. Once I've done that, I schedule out what those mini projects or tasks are, and I will block that time off in my calendar. I also like to keep it visual. If the project is on a bulletin board with a timeline or a chart or something along those lines that I can keep that bigger picture in mind, I'm less likely to not get what needs to be done in the time it needs to be done. And when you're looking at these projects that you've planned out, you have to make sure that you keep them high on your priority list. Procrastinating is really one of the #1 reasons why we can't get anything done, and one of the greatest factors in inability for time management to be successful. When it comes to procrastinating, there are 6 basic reasons why we procrastinate. First and foremost is stress. So when we're under a lot of stress, we tend to almost shut down to some degree, and one of the other 5 tend to come into play. There are a lot of ways for you to reduce stress. I've always found that if it is procrastination-related stress, one of the things that several of the things that I can do can include I can get up and go for a 5-minute brisk walk. I can listen to a comedian on the radio, anything that's going to alleviate tension. So some form of exercise. You can do jumping jacks or run in place in your office. Pandora has some great funny comedians, and everyone knows that the power of laughter is just amazing. So find out what's going to work for you to reduce those stress levels. Like it or not, we all have those days where we're just lazy. And it's okay if it's for a little bit. But if it starts to become a pattern and you let it maintain into a pattern, it can then turn into lack of overall motivation. So if you find yourself having one of those lazy days, it's important that you ask yourself, why am I being lazy? Is it just one of those days, or is it the sign of a bigger problem? If you can kind of nip it in the bud on day one, then it doesn't transfer in. If you're suffering from a lack of motivation, that can come from a lot of different sources, whether it's personal or professional. But when you're suffering from a lack of overall motivation, it's going to be important that you start to ask yourself why you do what it is that you do in the first place. Find that inspirational point that made you want to do what you're doing in the first place. Kind of latch on to that. Think of some of the successes that you've had. I mean, there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be things that are difficult. But if you can focus on the bigger picture, you can be a lot more successful in the long run. Some of us just have a general lack of discipline, and structure doesn't work for us well. And in time management and accomplishing projects and getting things done, a lack of discipline is something that can be a huge detriment. You want to make sure that if this is something that affects you, that you start to develop the skills to overcome it. With technology today, there are a ton of time management resources that you can implement on your computers, on your phones. Most of them are free, but you have to work with what's going to be best for you. If it's a lack of discipline that's causing you to procrastinate, the key is to remember you're not going to fix that problem in a day. But what you can do is implement something that changes how you manage your lack of discipline, once a week or once a month, and implement that skill, develop it, incorporate it into a habit, and then move forward. We also procrastinate when we don't have the skill to complete the task that we've been given. If that's the case, you've got three options. First one is you can do what's called learn up. Get the training or the information that you need so that you have the skill to do what needs to be done. Number two is you can delegate it to somebody who has it. Or number three, you can reevaluate the importance of that task and ditch it if it's not critical to what you're doing. And the last item on procrastinating is perfectionism. For those of us that need everything to be perfect and we will put it off to the last minute so we can get it done in a time frame and accept the fact that it's not perfect just because we were on a time crunch, that's something that can delay you getting done what you need to get done. So it's important to establish a benchmark of good enough. And I'm not saying that good enough needs to be bare minimum, but good enough needs to be a point where you're ready to move whatever it is you're working on to the next point, to the next phase, to the next person. And only you can identify what that is, and it may be different for different projects and different things that you do. But understanding that no matter how much you try to make something perfect, it's never going to be. So including others in that process will be helpful to you. And I think this is something that affects all of us today, and that is the ever-present, never-ending distractions in the workplace. And those distractions can be technology-based, whether it's your cell phone, the internet, social media, your email. It can be just regular telephones ringing, your coworkers, customers or clients. And of course, managers in meetings can be distractors too to what you're trying to accomplish. Before you know it, your entire day can get co-opted by other people and other things. Yet some of those things can be avoided and or managed. Others, not so much, and those are the ones that you're just going to have to accept as part of your workday. For those things that can be managed, a lot of technology can be managed. If you think back to the days before cell phones even existed or social media even existed, we survived just fine in the workplace without checking our Facebook pages every hour. So here are 4 tips that should help you manage some of those distractors that you can choose to ignore or avoid. I recommend turning off all notification levels on your computers, on your cell phones. Silence everything. If you're working on something, you do not need to know every single email that's coming in as it's coming in. If you are trying to accomplish something, you don't need your social media beeping at you every 5 minutes so that you're distracted in thinking about that instead. So when you're turning it off, you then start to have a schedule of when you're going to look at these things. So although you may turn off the notifications, you can't pretend that the email doesn't exist. When you're turning off those instant notifications, I recommend checking your voicemail, email, social media, whatever it is that you have to look at 4 times a day. You do it when you first get into the office, before you go to lunch, after lunch, and about an hour before you leave for the day. And by only checking your technology during those time periods, you're able to focus your attention on the technology. You will have been able to focus your attention on other things throughout the day. If you have a door to your office and you need to get something done, close the door. Nothing will stop people from bothering you like a closed door. I'm a big fan of an open door policy whenever possible, but when I need to get something done, I do close the door and I'm able to eliminate a lot of what's going on around me. If you don't have a door, you can use headphones. So earbuds or headphones or something where you can tune out the noise of what's going on around you will enable you to stay more focused. And another thing that you can do is change your workspace configuration. So I have my office set up so that when I'm working on something, the way my monitor is positioned, the way my desk is positioned, my back is to the door. And when I'm being social, my face is to the front. And that enables me to eliminate what's going on behind me. I can't see it, therefore it doesn't distract me nearly as much as it used to. Once you've identified what your points of time management challenges are and you've started to overcome some of those obstacles, the next thing that you're going to need to do is really figure out how you're going to prioritize what's on your plate and in your day. So if you haven't seen this before, this is a quadrant style graph that kind of outlines what our tasks fall into. We spend most of our day in the important and urgent column. And that is those things that, believe it or not, can actually stop you from achieving your goals, but still have to be done whether you like it or not. They prevent you from actually completing your work, and they can't be prevented, and they're going to become an integral part of your day. And these are things that you also have difficulty scheduling. You can't schedule a crisis. You can't schedule last-minute assignments, pressing problems, vital customer calls. You know, those are all things that just happen, but we have to deal with them whether we want to or not. The not urgent and important column is where ideally you want to spend the bulk of your time. These are the tasks and the projects and the things that you work on that really work towards achieving your goals. They are the steps to completing your work, the things that you need to do in a day. And these are the things that help you grow as an individual, help you grow as a leader, help your organization grow. It's in this quadrant when you're working that some of the best ideas come to individuals. I like to refer to them as the epiphany moments in life, but that's usually when they occur. It's important that you set aside at least a half an hour, ideally an hour of your day, to be working on these not urgent but important items. Then there are the things that are not important and urgent, and they should be given a much lower priority. They are things that should be moved into the next day if you're having a wildly busy day. And if possible, they should be things that are avoided. You know, those are the needless interruptions, other people's minor issues, the social distractions, the technology distractions. The not urgent and not important is sometimes the place that's, you know, the most fun to be, but the least productive to be, and it should be avoided at all costs. So when you're prioritizing your tasks, if you look at them in correlation to this quadrant and kind of say, okay, this is urgent and important, I have to do this today. This is urgent or not urgent and important, so I should do work on this today, but if not, it can wait till tomorrow. The urgent, not important, this is one of the last things I'm going to try to accomplish today. And the not urgent, not important are the things that you're not going to do that day. Another way to look at your prioritizing is kind of the ABCs. And that's where you look at, you know, priority A. These are the critical things. These are those items that fall into the urgent and important column, and hopefully a few things that fall in the not urgent but important column. So anything that has to be done right away, or something important, or something's going to go terribly wrong if you don't complete it. Priority B, these are the tasks that are, you know, business as usual. And this is everything that you have to do to meet your short and long-term business and career goals. And then priority C is everything else. And these are a lot of the busy work, 95% of what you do online, organizing things that you want to accomplish instead of things that you need to accomplish. And when you're prioritizing the ABC, obviously A comes first in how you get things done, B comes second, C comes third. Some tips to help you in prioritizing: make a list. And when you're making that list, it's important to assess the value of that task or that project to the bigger picture. And it's important to be honest in that assessment. You should take a look at what makes money versus what costs you money. If I don't get this done, is it going to cost me money? And if I don't get this done, is it not going to make me money? Or if I do get it done, will I make more money? And then you should also include the items that are going to lighten the mental load. So if there's that thing that you've been procrastinating that gives you a tremendous feeling of being overwhelmed and has been a giant distraction on your desk, get it done. When it's gone, it's gone. It also helps to be flexible. So as much as you can have a list, you can have a plan, you can have goals. The reality of it is that life happens, work happens, other people happen, crises happen. So in being flexible, you can kind of cut the cord on the responsibility that it all has to be done today. In your flexibility, try to accomplish what can be done today, but be willing to put things off that can't. And never 100% schedule yourself for your full day. If you have 8 hours in the office, if you can actually schedule 2 to 3 hours of productive planned work, that's a great day. If you leave the rest of the day for all of those important and urgent things that are going to come up, you'll be a lot more productive. I like to focus on 3 MITs per day. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that, but MIT stands for most important things. And so I pick 3 things every day that I'm going to accomplish come hell or high water. And I will not leave my office until those 3 things are done. believe it or not, when you start to incorporate that philosophy into your workday, those 3 things can get done before 11 o'clock most days. And so it can be a way to make sure that you focus early in your day and throughout your day. I like to only focus on things that are going to provide value, whether it's to myself, to my organization, to others. If the whole point of doing an exercise is just for the point of doing the exercise, I tend to view it as a lower priority. You should think long-term. So what is the long-term impact of this task? Is it a domino effect that if I don't complete this, then I can't complete the other 50 things that are behind it? And will completing this task make a difference today, a week, a month, or a year from now? First things first really focuses on accomplishing those 3 MITs first thing in the morning. And in the mornings, you can tend to get away with fewer distractions. And I'm not really sure why that is, but it's been proven that you can typically get more done before 10, 11 o'clock in the morning than you can from noon till 5. Avoid the time wasters. Find out where you're wasting time. And the best way to do that is if you spend an entire week with a pad of paper in front of you and you write down everything that you do and the length of time that you spend on it, the number of things that you write down that are a waste of time will be much higher than you expected it to be. So by tracking your daily activities, you can find out what some of those triggers to the time wasters really are. When you're focusing on the important, when it comes to prioritizing, recognizing that compromise is always going to be necessary. When you're narrowing your list of what needs to get done and how it needs to get done, the compromise is going to come in from the other people around you and components of the organization around you. If it's important to your organization or to your boss or to your client that you accomplish a particular thing on a particular day, even though you don't agree that it has to be done that day, sometimes you have to make the compromise and get done what other people have that expectation for. Don't dwell on what didn't go well. Time management and prioritizing is a skill that's learned. It's not a skill that's innate. So if you don't dwell on what some of your past problems have been and tend to focus more on celebrating what went right and incorporating more of that into your day, you will tend to be more successful. I also think it also helps to fix the things that you can and accept the things that you can't. We all have those things in our workday in our lives that I like to call them gun to the head items or gun to the head moments. That, you know, even if there was a gun to your head, you would still procrastinate it or try to avoid it or not do it. And if that is the case, you are much better off coming up with a strategy to delegate that to someone else or outsource it so that the task is getting done in the appropriate time frame, but it doesn't necessarily stay on your plate. It's also important not to hoard everything. Delegation is key. One of the most successful strategies for time management is knowing what you can and should delegate to those around you. For those of you that like to be in control, if you're anything like me, that's a very hard thing for you to do, but it's an important thing for you to do. Once you've managed to focus on the important and your prioritization, then it's time to take a look at what time management strategies and tips are out there to help you. The first thing that you need if you're looking to make changes to your time management is identify what tool is right for you. So in the course of my career, I have heard that, oh, no, you have to use technology, and oh, no, you have to use paper, and this is the system, or that is the system. And if I've learned nothing else, what I've learned is that every person functions better under a different system. I have seen a post-it note system that is extremely effective for one individual that would drive me insane. I have seen paper-based systems that are highly effective and work well for the individuals. and I have seen software solutions or system-based solutions that work very well for others. The key is making sure that you have the system that works for you. If you try to incorporate a system and it's clearly not working for you, abandon it early, find something else. Once you have your tools to help you manage your time, it's important that you set time limits in getting the system up and running. So when you're setting time limits, accept that you're going to try to do everything right the first time so that you don't have to go back and do it again. And it's also important to not focus on that perfection, whether it's your time management skills or the work that you're trying to accomplish. You need to also be organized, and this is the same philosophies as the tools. You have to use the organizational systems, tools that works well for you. I have a colleague that likes to have every file visible, and so there's files all over his floor. But it works for him. Drives me crazy, but it works for him. There are people that work well with stacks of paper and not actual files, but they can go to the stack of paper and pull out a specific sheet without any effort, if that's what works for them. When you have to have shared resources and you're looking for shared organizational options, you want them to be something that's quick and easy so that it can be handled by everybody. It also helps to establish routines. If you have your everyday tasks all lined up, you know that this has to be done on every Monday, and you come in and you do that every Monday, it becomes part of your routine. And it also, when you're establishing your routine, you need to minimize the distractions to your routine. So if, every time I go get a glass of water, I have to pass by 10 offices and I have to talk to 10 people. How can I minimize that? How can I reduce the amount of talking that I have to do along the way? If I put headphones in, is it going to make a difference? Some people like lists. I happen to be one of those people. They have lists for everyday tasks, important tasks, and urgent tasks, and so that they're keeping track of those things that matter to them in that day. When you're looking at the time management, you want to look at the financial benefits. Is this something that's going to generate revenue, or is this something that's going to cost money? The other item that you can factor in from the non-for-profit side is this something that's in line with the mission. It's always important to consider your consequences. So know what's going to happen if you don't complete something. If you know the consequences, sometimes they're worth it, and sometimes they're not. So, and only you can make that determination. If you have personal projects that you also need to accomplish during the day, it's important that you schedule the time for that as well, as long as your employer allows it, and that you recognize the importance of those personal items throughout the course of the day. Now, I've talked a little bit about delegating and the importance of delegating in both prioritizing, getting rid of overcoming the obstacles to time management, as well as in some of the strategies or the tips to help you with your time management. So when you're delegating, it's important that you kind of delegate well. So when you're delegating to someone, it's important that you communicate clearly what it is that you want them to do. You need to define the project tasks, and then you need to match the tasks to the person that you want to do them. If you're asking someone to complete something that they probably shouldn't or are not qualified to do, the odds of them procrastinating it are pretty high. And that lies in with selecting the right people for delegating those tasks. After you've delegated the task, it's important to track their progress. Now, track their progress does not mean micromanage. Have predetermined check-in dates that are appropriate for the items that you've been requested to have them complete for you. When they give you the progress report, it's important that you provide feedback, positive and negative, always constructive. Allow for somebody to think differently than you do or accomplish something in a different way than you would, in that they have their own creative process. And I've always found that it helps to provide incentives when delegating, especially in the beginning. If you have large projects, you should consider looking at some different types of software for either project management, time management, or ones that are a combination thereof, depending on what your needs are. So most project management softwares are based on a Gantt chart that are task-oriented with delegation tools. Time management is much more about scheduling time, appointments, tasks, and your contacts, whereas the combination softwares are going to integrate the two together. There are, in addition to software, there are many apps. So depending on what you utilize in your office environment and your communication methods is going to determine what's going to work best for you. So I have a couple of slides, just two, to get us started on this conversation. So the first one is, in the entity separation, there's going to be two different things that you need to be considering, and they can be completely opposite. One is the operational separations that are going to need to happen, and the other are the legal and tax separations that need to happen. So from an operational standpoint, you need to identify within your organization what resources are going to be shared, what resources need to be kept separate, and in those shared separation of resources, you should be considering things like staffing, what that chain of command is going to look like, operational functionality, are there locational issues, the financial, branding, marketing, and sales. From the legal tax side of things, this is where things get much more complicated. So the structure of your subsidiary entity, which is the for-profit, you have options for that. So selecting the right one. The existing bylaws of the not-for-profit are going to determine what your options are for the legal and tax separations. There are also going to be limitations that are federally and New York State imposed limitations based on different funding sources, based on different debt mechanisms, and most importantly, IRS regulations. In reviewing the IRS regulations, I was able to identify that it is okay to have shared internet portals for the not-for-profit and the for-profit. However, there does have to be a formal affiliate agreement in place. The subsidiary board of directors can just be appointed by the parent board. There can be some overlap, but it cannot be a duplication. And there has to be separate board meetings and reporting. They can share a mailing address. They absolutely have to have separate books or finances and separate record keeping. And they have to have independent management. So that said, the next steps in this separation of structures that all of your organizations should be going through, first and foremost, you're going to need to review the impacting factors. So where you're going to start is with your existing bylaws, if there's any bond or financing or funding agreements, if there's any New York State rules and regulations related to your particular organization that you need to address, and any of the OPWDD rules and regulations related to funding that are going to impact this. Once you've taken a look at those overall impacting factors, there needs to be a conversation with your board of directors. And that conversation needs to have all of the upper level management of the organization on the same page when they approach the board for what they are looking to do and why they're looking to do it and what some of those barriers are going to be. And then once you've had that board conversation, then you get into a professional review. whether it's legal counsel, you have your CPA review the information, there needs to be an outside source that's going to say, yep, you can do this, or no, you can't do that, or this is how we would structure this is how we would structure that. So that said, I'd really like to have an open conversation for the last part of this call as to what some of your foreseen challenges are, some of the things that are concerns for you, anything that you don't understand.
Hi, how you doing? One of the things that I've been working with, and actually goes back to the first homework assignment, has to do with how we create the legal separation between the business and the not-for-profit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we want to do is we don't want to create a for-profit entity. We want both entities to be not-for-profit, but we want them to be legally separate. And you had, us pick between DBA, sole proprietor, DBA, partnership, and those different identifications. What would be the legal term for what we would do if we have a wall between one not-for-profit and another not-for-profit?
It's a 501c3.
Okay.
Is the classification
Mm-hmm.
of a traditional nonprofit.
Okay.
And that's the quote-unquote IRS tax code classification. All of the 501s, so there's like 501c3, there's 501bs, there's a wide variety of 501s.
Mm-hmm.
But the 501c3 is the most common not-for-profit classification. What you want to do is make sure that that's the right classification for what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If not, pick one of the other ones.
So we would choose, basically we would be creating a separate not-for-profit that would be under the same umbrella?
I don't know if you can create a subsidiary not-for-profit. You can
Mm-hmm.
create a complementary not-for-profit that operates side by side,
Okay.
but not combined.
All right, thank you.
Now, I will warn you, the challenges with having complementary 501c3s is
Mm-hmm.
that typically at the day that they start, everything's great. But as industries change and markets change and different things change, because they have separate boards,
Mm-hmm.
they can grow apart and eventually be competing.
So what's the benefit then of becoming a for-profit?
Well, as a for-profit, if it's a subsidiary of the not-for-profit, the for-profit is owned solely by the not-for-profit. So therefore, it can never compete with itself.
All right.
And like the boards are appointed by the for-profit board gets appointed by the not-for-profit board. The for-profit board reports to the non-for-profit board. So it becomes part of, but there's a separation.
Okay.
It also gives you more flexibility in what you do with the profit
Mm-hmm.
of the operations than if you were not-for-profit.
All right, that's good. So it's actually better to be a for-profit then?
I would think so, only because you run the risk of, if your mission in the second for-profit is X and it's interpreted to be, you typically write 501c3 missions to be relatively broad for changes in the world.
Okay.
And they can apply that broad to no longer fund your organization, but to fund somebody else down the road.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who else has some challenges, concerns, fears?
What if you have already have two entities, two separate entities, but you share the same board? For example, a holding company that might own property, vehicles, things like that, but your second 501c3 is really your program operations.
So are they both 501c3s?
They both are, and they both have they share the same board. So,
But they have separate board meetings, separate record keeping, separate everything?
yes.
Yeah. So that's perfectly allowed, and the only challenge, it's kind of the same situation that they were asking about down in Brooklyn, that as long as the two boards stay the same, but there's probably nothing in their bylaws that requires it to be that way. And should there become some divisiveness between the two organizations, we don't see it very often in a real estate holding company, but they could decide not to lease to you anymore and lease to somebody else. So that's where the complementary 501c3s can become a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
If there's currently a separate holding company, you're probably in a little bit better position legally for the for-profit to lease space from the holding company separately from the not-for-profit. But you're still going to need another entity for what it is that you're working on that's for-profit.
What are some of the benefits of a not-for-profit?
Well, the benefits of a not-for-profit is their tax status is different. They're eligible for different fundraising and donations. You're also able to use volunteer labor. That's probably one of the largest incentives in the current workforce environment. A non-for-profit has to, or a for-profit has to operate as a traditional business because that's what it is. So your only fundraising mechanism is revenue, and that's from selling what it is your business does. The primary advantage to a for-profit is what happens with the profit of the company is less regulated, I should say, whereas the profits of a not-for-profit must go into the very specific components of the mission. It's not subject to the regulatory and reporting and disclosures that the non-for-profit is. The other great advantage to a for-profit is that you're eligible for more funding options, especially from the perspective of startup costs. For-profit entities are eligible for most financing programs, not-for-profits are not. So anything that falls under the SBA or the USDA, nonprofits are not eligible for, but for-profits are. The greatest financial liability to any organization, whether it's a not-for-profit or a for-profit, comes in being sued, and there are two primary mechanisms on the for-profit end that mitigate that risk for businesses. First is the structure. If you go with a traditional corporation or an LLC, which are for-profit entities, there is built-in liability protections for either the parent or for the individual owners. You'll see that a lot in corporate structures, right? So GE is the main corporation, and they have thousands of subsidiaries, and some of those subsidiaries have subsidiaries which have subsidiaries. And so it's kind of a layering effect, which is what you would be doing in creating a subsidiary. So that's the number one liability protection. The second liability protection is in insurance. And general liabilities policies for business operations are what really protect you in the event that you're sued. But the financial risks are going to be the same. The landlord is going, if you sign a 5-year lease and you're committed to it, and the for-profit or the corresponding complementary not-for-profit goes out of business, they're going to go after both equally hard.
Okay. Especially
down in your neck of the woods. Up here, probably not as hard. And in different areas, they're going to have different challenges with that.
Okay, yeah, no, the landlords here like to play hardball.
Yeah, and because they can. I don't say I blame them, but in different areas, like in the Albany area, we have surplus of some types of spaces and a shortage of others. So depending on what you're renting is depending on how hard the landlord will be. But my guess is that in Brooklyn, all spaces high demand.
All right. And you said that if we were to create a separate nonprofit, that then both agencies would be vulnerable. They could be if they can show that there's a correlation between the two.
especially if the mission of the one is to fund the other. You either have to have a mission that's so broad that puts you at great risk in the future of that as a funding source, or you have to have such a specialized mission that you can't say that you're separate.
Okay.
But that's where the legal counsel component of things will really come into play. So, you know, all of the best laid plans, you do all of your homework, it sounds like you're well into it. Once your executive director has started to have conversations with the board about this, that's when the legal counsel will come in and, based on your individual situation, make the recommendations that are going to be best for you.